Somi Arian describes herself as a tech philosopher. She's also an entrepreneur with her own subscription Web3 education platform led by women called Inpeak. After her appearance at the BSV convention in Dubai, I wanted to ask her about her work and her impressions of the BSV crowd, who she was meeting for the first time.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
So Somi, thank you very much for doing CoinGeek Conversations today.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. And let's start by talking about Inpeak, which is your education business for blockchain and Bitcoin. How would you describe it and what does it do?
It's a Web3 education platform. So it's all aspects of Web3. So from the start, how do you create a wallet? And then all the different aspects of Web3, NFTs, crypto, DeFi, DAOs, everything.
It's a subscription service, right?
Yes, it's a subscription service, but by the time this interview goes out, potentially we will have released our NFTs. So people will have the option of becoming a member through NFTs, and NFT holders have some additional benefits.
And I know in a previous incarnation it had an emphasis on women.
Yes.
Is that going to continue?
Yes, so FemPeak is now becoming a subset of Inpeak. So in for inspire, in this together, inclusive.
Right, it used to be called FemPeak.
Yes, it used to be called FemPeak, now it's Inpeak, and then FemPeak becomes a subset.
Right. And so what do you see as the main jobs to be done in terms of educating people about Web3?
Oh my God, there's so much, because it's like a whole new world, right? So companies are turning into DAOs. The way that we interact with the web is going to be mostly through our wallets. So there's just so much to learn about. NFTs are a whole new world, right? So much.
Well, let me ask you the very basic question for education. What is Web3?
So Web3 is the next incarnation of the kind of internet that we have right now. In the current internet, or Web 2.0, Web 2 is a part of the internet, or a version of the internet where we can read and write, but we can't own digital assets. So Web 3 gives us the ability to own digital assets, and that's really the main difference, because you can now own NFTs that can be worth as much as your house. Right,
but if I start a website and put my content onto it, don't I own that stuff?
No, not really, because at the end of the day, like you own the copyright to it, right? But the way that you can monetize with Web3, you can't necessarily monetize in the same way, because let's say, for example, with my subscription service, people will have to use something like, there are like third-party things that are in the background, like say Stripe, or different kinds of third-party providers that we manage. And then when people pay, that money goes into, essentially, you probably know how the banking system works, right? So it's not like the money goes from my bank to your bank. There's like a central bank behind it, right? There's like this infrastructure behind it. Whereas with Web3, your content is tied into your wallet, right? And people can pay you directly to your wallet. So there's that ability to actually own content, or to be able to monetize it in a way that you can't do with Web.
I think quite a lot of the hopes of Web3 entrepreneurs hinge on the idea that people are very worried about their data being misused, or people profiting from it, and also that they are very resistant to advertising, and particularly personalized advertising and so on. I'm not convinced that those are fears that are very powerful, and that perhaps pushing people to Web3 alternatives because they're worried about that may not be enough, and that we need something very positive to draw people into these new ideas.
I couldn't agree more. A lot of people think that, because people don't like advertising, they're going to turn to crypto. That's not necessarily true. I actually ran a poll on my Twitter, and I have talked to, as I go to different conversations, different conferences, unless you're in a crypto native environment, most people don't really care. They prefer to have something for free, and they don't necessarily think that deeply about their data.
Is that a big problem then?
Yes and no. I think it's one of those things that you don't realize that it's valuable until somebody explains it to you. You know, just think about us, you know, like I don't call myself necessarily a crypto native, but I would say that I'm more of a blockchain native because I actually learned about blockchain before I learned about crypto. So for me, blockchain technology was so much more interesting than the money aspect of it. I was, you know, when I first learned about blockchain around 2017, the first thing that came to my mind was that this is going to disrupt Amazon, Facebook, Google. That's what was interesting to me. And I think it's like one of those things, it's about education. If you learn about it, then you see, oh, okay, this is really valuable, and you know, you learn about it. But I think the barrier to education and entry there is that most of the time, it's very hard to get people's attention to even listen, to actually take interest in that, because they're bombarded by so much entertainment, from Instagram to you know, to YouTube to TikTok. There's this short content, the reels, you know, and they're just so mesmerizing, and they draw you in. So people just forget about these things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned your own introduction to blockchain. Maybe I could ask you a little bit about your own history and how you got into this, because I know that you fronted up a heavy metal band at one
Yes.
point. So
Yes.
maybe you could tell me a little bit about that and how you got from there to blockchain, because it's not an obvious
No.
link.
Well, I mean, the heavy metal band, death metal band, that was like, yeah, that was like my, you know, it was a hobby for a few years when I was a student. I studied in St. Andrews University. I studied political philosophy and philosophy of science and technology and transatlantic studies. Got 2 master's degrees in those. I was doing a PhD. I had to hand in my thesis sooner because I ran out of money. I was an overseas student. And before that, I worked for United Nations and European embassies in Tehran. So I come from more of a political background. You know, I've always been interested in politics and philosophy.
And was this kind of music
Yes.
a political side to it?
Yes, it had. And it had mostly to do with my upbringing in Iran. And like, you know, I came from Iran to the UK to study, and, you know, I had a lot of anger. So
Yes, I was going to say anger perhaps was the message.
Yeah, exactly. And then after 4 years of doing it, I felt like I wasn't angry anymore. And I just felt like, you know, it was a bit disingenuous if I...
Maybe you're going to go to folk music or something nice and gentle now.
Well, nowadays I don't listen to music that much because I'm listening to podcasts all the time. And if I'm working, I tend to have quiet.
Right. But so how did blockchain come along then?
So if the interest in heavy metal music is an indication, I'm an anarchist, you know, at heart. And coming from Iran, you know, I've always been against governments. I've always been against authority of any sort. So for me, blockchain technology was really interesting because of the possibility of self-organization, you know, and being able to organize ourselves without necessarily governments or minimizing the impact of governments. On the other hand, I was also super interested in AI. I did a lot of study and research on AI. I used to, just like now I go around speaking at conferences about blockchain, I used to give a lot of talks about AI, and I still do actually. I had another one online yesterday. So the way I see it, I think that AI could potentially really empower governments in a way that that will increase surveillance, and blockchain, if it's used in the right way, could counteract that.
So you're interested in AI more from the point of view of what a threat it might be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. From a from the viewpoint of surveillance and yeah.
Would you say you're a libertarian?
I don't like to put myself in any category, any kind of, I don't follow, sometimes I speak to libertarians and there are things they say that I don't necessarily agree with, but in general, I have an anarchist leaning.
Right. Okay, so that was the interest in blockchain.
Yes.
And did that come into your life in a professional way at all, or what were you doing at that time, and how did you get
Well, at the time when I started doing a lot of research on AI and blockchain, I had a marketing agency. I still have that marketing agency. I own it, but I don't run it myself. And because of that, I made a documentary called The Millennial Disruption, which won several international awards. I interviewed people like Gary Vaynerchuk, had people like, from The Economist, Marie Claire, Bentley, and it did really well, that documentary, and opened up a lot of doors for me. And because of that, then I started giving a lot of talks around the world, and talked a lot about the impact of technology on millennials and how millennials are, like I'm an older millennial, how millennials are this transition point between the pre-digital and post-digital world. And I see myself as a transition architect. I feel like we are in this century, we are merging with technology. I feel like we are becoming something new. I feel like we are already not Homo sapiens anymore. I think we are morphing.
Is that something we should be worried about?
To the extent that apes were worried about becoming humans. So,
So no.
Yeah. Not on. Depends on from whose perspective you look at it, right? From the viewpoint of evolution, no, because it's interesting. I embrace it, and I want to know what will happen to the future of humanity. I want to be an active participant, not a passive observer. But from the viewpoint of the fact that your life will be disrupted, then maybe yes.
But do you think that as these changes come about, there's a need for political oversight of these changes to stop the kind of abuses that you're worried about? And I think you talked yesterday about how you were critical of Facebook and other tech giants in Silicon Valley. Do we need to get ahead of that curve in putting in place safeguards around what may emerge from this new technology?
If anything, I would say that, so we have now got a problem of nation state, and then we have the problem of the corporate state. They're both as bad as each other. So I don't necessarily think that nation state is our guard against the corporate state, and vice versa. And in fact, there is a very good chance that the corporate state and the nation state will work together, just like we see right now in China. So
as a kind of conspiracy against people.
Yes, because it would make sense for them. It just makes sense. You think about, in China, the nation state and the corporate state are essentially one and the same. So it would make sense, if I were the government, and I would see that we have these corporate states that have got all the data about our users. So it would make sense for us to work together. So if anything, I see decentralization as a hedge against that. So the sooner we educate people about decentralization and make them realize that CBDCs are not the type of crypto that are decentralized, and make them realize that Facebook's Meta is not, or Meta's metaverse is not a decentralized metaverse. So if people understand these things and they extract themselves from these systems, we have a chance of not becoming China.
Right. So you're putting quite a lot of emphasis on the idea of decentralization. That sort of, to you, is the key to avoiding these problems from either the state or the corporate sector. Is that right?
I think that it's the best hedge we have so far, right? I don't necessarily think that it's, it's the end state of where it can go, but it's one step in the right direction.
But I mean, I just almost wonder whether decentralization is possible anymore, because the communication links between people and all the things that they do are so rich that a world in which different villages in different countries found it hard to communicate, that's a decentralized world. But can we ever get to that with the level of sophisticated technology that we're talking about?
I think that we can, if we teach people more about self-custody, and there is, look, we have a small window of opportunity. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's the truth. We have a small window of opportunity, I'd say 3 to 5 years.
But it seems like your message is a political one rather than a technological one, really, isn't it?
How do you separate these?
Well, you might be just saying, here's Web3 now, if you do this with it, all great things will happen. But you're not. You're saying, We need to think about the control systems and who's in charge, and those are what I would call political.
Yeah, that's why I call myself a tech philosopher. It's not necessarily political, but philosophical. It's about human integrity. To what degree do you want to have that to maintain that human integrity? So you could call it political. I'd say it's more. I study political philosophy. Right?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So I'm a Nietzschean, right? And Nietzsche talks about the Übermensch. Like this advanced human that can decipher things, that can decide for themselves, that's constantly self-overcoming.
That's the direction we should be heading in.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's what I'm advocating for.
Right. Well,
but it does put a lot of emphasis on the individual.
Yes.
And it's very hard. Like I appreciate that not everybody can live the way I do, right? It can be quite intense because you are constantly learning. Like I haven't watched a single Netflix series or movie for 2.5 years now. Like literally, right? Like literally, I have no entertainment.
And what point are you making by saying that?
That I am very conscious of how I spend my time, right? So during the pandemic, the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, the number of Netflix users went up by several million, right? 20 million or something. And at that time, I started a whole new business, which is now valued at over 25 million pounds. So within that time, I built a whole new business by educating myself about completely new fields and new things, right? But that was the time that many people chose to watch Netflix and spend time chilling, So it's hard because the type of life that I'm inviting people to live is going against the grain of how you are being programmed by Meta and by the governments, right?
But some people might say, well, we can't all be sort of high-powered entrepreneurs. I'd rather just relax and watch Netflix. That's fine, thank you.
Yeah, then that's okay. So what will happen is that I think we are going to be ending up with a society where there's a top 5% that are going to do all the creative work, maybe 5 to 10% that do all the creative work, and everybody else will be sitting home watching Netflix.
Well, but also, kind of almost worse than that is the top 1% who own sort of like 90% of the wealth and the 99% who don't.
Yeah, but don't you think they deserve it? Because if they work hard for it.
Well, they might not have worked hard. It might have just sort of fallen into their laps somehow.
Maybe, but most of the people that I see, most of the entrepreneurs that I see, they work very hard. I work 15 hours a day.
Right.
Right. I'm yet to come across entrepreneurs that things just fell into their laps.
Right.
Right. Like I'm surrounded by people.
Have you met investment bankers?
Well, they are part of the old system, right?
Right.
But in the kind of like new decentralized world, and people who are, I'm surrounded by people who work very, very hard.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't argue with that at all. Well, just to sort of bring this down to earth, we're here at the Dubai conference for Bitcoin SV. You're somewhat new to Bitcoin SV, I think. What are your impressions of the crowd that you've met here?
Fascinating. I'm learning quite a lot. So what I'm seeing here, I think the visitors and the people who are coming here, they're definitely not crypto native. They're very new to the space and they're learning. So it's very, very different from, things like permissionless and these types of consensus and things like that, which is like mostly crypto native. So it's really interesting to see their reaction, because to them, blockchain is blockchain. They don't realize the differences. They don't know. There's so much they don't know. They're really early. So they're...
What, the people at this conference
Yeah.
you think are rather underinformed?
Yes. Everybody that I've been talking to.
And why? What is it that what is it that they don't sort of get?
Well, for example, yesterday on our panel, Kurt asked...
Kurt Wilgert Jr.
Yeah. He asked how many people here know what Web3 is, and we had one person raise.
You mean in the audience?
Yes.
I think they were worried that they might have to say something if they put their hand up.
No, they just, we just asked if anybody had, we asked how many people had a crypto wallet, and only a few hands went up. So many people here. And then walking around, I was also talking to a lot of people, and so people are in Dubai. My understanding is that they're very skeptical of crypto in general, and quite a few people came to me and said, thanked me for the panel, and they said that I just don't understand crypto. I don't understand it. There's why is it? What is it backed by? They really, really don't get it. So it's a very interesting audience. I think it's like they need a lot more of these types of conferences, a lot more education to even, they need to watch Crypto for Non-Believers.
Right, but the people who do know about Bitcoin SV, and there are a good number of them here as well, what is your view of Bitcoin SV compared to actually, people here actually don't even like to call it a cryptocurrency. What is your view of Bitcoin SV compared to other cryptocurrencies?
I think it's early for me to talk about this because I'm just learning more about it. But I just had a very, very interesting conversation with a number of people who are working on NFTs to be built on BSV. And very interesting, like a really different view to, say, Ethereum NFTs.
In what way?
So they are not going for the crypto native, crowd. They don't care.
They're reaching out to the wider audience.
The wider audience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that could be interesting, and I will be definitely following the journey, and I really want to learn more. Like I said yesterday, the way I see it, Ethereum is like Apple. It's you go into the system, it's expensive, and you're locked in. But it's got that kind of legacy feel, it's got that high-end feel, and it is expensive. It's not for everybody. And then
well, it simply wouldn't work for a lot of the applications that are being talked about here, would it? Because being expensive would rule it out.
Yeah, unless then you engage layer 2s, and of course we know that layer 2s are very complex as well. There's a learning curve. So Ethereum has got its place, and it's not trying to be something else, unless maybe the layer 2s are trying to kind of bridge that gap. And then there's if Ethereum is like Apple, there's room for a Microsoft, and it is yet to be determined who is going to be that Microsoft. I know that Solana is trying. It doesn't seem to be going that well. They keep going down, and there's a lot of growing pains there. So maybe BSV could fill that gap.
Well, one perhaps similarity between BSV and Microsoft compared to Ethereum is that BSV does encourage lots of different entities to take part in it, and it's not a unified thing in the same way. So the comparison is potentially quite a good one, I think.
Yeah, I think that this is, as a tech philosopher, this is like observation is the thing that I do, right? And for me, I think that Ethereum is so similar to Apple in many ways. And once you get in, you become kind of locked into that ecosystem. So everything I have is Apple. And it's a pain in the neck sometimes, it's really a pain. But I am so locked into it that, that's like getting out is more painful than trying to. So what I do is I have everything in Apple, and then I have some Microsoft devices that if I need to do anything that needs, more freedom, then I can turn to those. But generally speaking, I tend to be in that Apple ecosystem.
Right. Well, we should probably stop in a minute, but just to finish, I wonder whether, as somebody who's an educator and a philosopher, what would your message be to the BSV crowd here at Dubai, or perhaps watching this online? What sort of direction and what sort of approach would you advise?
I would say the main thing for me would be I need to really look into how decentralized the system is. I would say just whatever you do, don't forget that decentralization is the core of what this technology is supposed to be about. So as long as you keep it sufficiently decentralized, that's in many, many ways, that keeps the integrity of everything crypto.
Going back to really what we said at the beginning of the conversation about personal ownership and personal responsibility, really.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Well, it's been really interesting, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks very much to Somi Arian. Next week, I'll be finding out about a pioneering business collaboration for the BSV blockchain, as Patrick Valerstick of IBM tells me about his work with Smart Ledger's CertiHash to create a new cybersecurity product. So please join Patrick and me next week for another CoinGeek conversation. Until then, thanks for listening and goodbye.
What does it take to make something useful? The will to do so. Gate to chain.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.